after a statistical tie that left Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney giving dueling victory speeches and doing so bravely without teleprompters so they could continue to ridicule President Obama for using his teleprompter. And after a majority of Iowa Republican caucus goers, almost 51%, voted against Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney, the big winner was President Barack Obama, who continued, without fear of ridicule, to use teleprompters in Ohio today, where he campaigned against Republican obstructionism in Congress. Today, the Obama re-election campaign senior strategist David Axelrod called Romney the 25% man and told reporters Romney entered as a weak front-runner. He leaves as a weak front-runner. Joining me now, chief political columnist for Politico, Roger Simon, former chief of staff to Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, Ron Carey, former advisor to George W. Bush and McCain campaigns, Mark McKinnon, and former DNC chairman and current CNBC contributor, Governor Howard Dean. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Governor Dean, what the Democrats were really hoping for is that there was no decisive winner in Iowa last night, as there was 4 years ago in the Democratic run. I think President Obama getting 37, Obama 37, Clinton about 8 points less than that. Nothing like that this time around. That is exactly what the Democrats needed, isn't it?
Well, it would have been more fun to have Santorum win decisively. But you know, I would have to say that this problem the Republicans have is pretty extraordinary. 75% of the people in that party just don't seem to want to vote for Mitt Romney for President of the United States. So this goes on. And as we go on, he moves further and further to the right. The most damaging thing that he has said so far is that he would veto the DREAM Act. And any hope that Republicans had of winning the really important Hispanic vote, I think, has now disappeared. I would be shocked if we got less than 67% that we got the last time, given what the Republicans have said over the last few months about this incredibly fast-growing group of Americans.
Mark McKinnon, the turnout was not what Republicans were hoping for. In fact, if you subtract the increase in turnout just for Ron Paul alone, you would get a lower turnout than 4 years ago. And so this was the time when all of America is supposed to be rising up against the oppressive rule of Barack Obama, and the uprising will begin in Iowa. It just didn't happen.
Well, it's not necessarily surprising that it's lower than 4 years ago, because Democrats were the party that were excited about the election 4 years ago, and Republicans weren't particularly. I would disagree about Romney, just in the sense that a longer drawn-out primary in many ways will make him a better candidate. He's a better candidate today than he was 4 years ago because he's been around the track. And just like it was for Barack Obama, that long drawn-out primary with Hillary Clinton made him a better general election candidate. So I would just say that, yes, it's unsettled. Yes, it may go on for a while longer. But over time, I think that will just make Romney a better candidate for the general election.
Ron Carey, Michelle Bachmann, the first one to drop out. You've worked with her in the past. What do you expect her to do in terms of an endorsement in this race?
I don't think she will endorse anybody in this race. I mean, I think her voters that were out there, and it was a dwindling number, they're going to know where to go. They're probably more aligned with Santorum than anybody else, and so I think he'll benefit the most. But I think, Michelle's going to look at the fact, there's been talk that she and her husband have talked about maybe she could be a VP pick. I don't think that's going to happen, but just to keep that option on the table, I think she'll keep her powder dry. If Santorum were the nominee, for example, Bachmann would not be the vice presidential candidate. If Romney was, you could say, well, there's maybe having a female on a ticket. That's more conservative. But even so, I don't think that would be a likely possibility. So I think Michelle's just going to sit and keep her powder dry and focus on coming back to Minnesota and probably running for re-election.
Well, Ron, quickly, what about the politics of re-election for her in Minnesota? And is she considering going after Al Franken's Senate seat in Minnesota?
Well, I think she is most likely going to be running for re-election. We haven't, in Minnesota, come up with our redistricting plan yet. The courts are going to be drawing those lines and announcing those by the end of February. And the likelihood is that she'll get a district that'll be as favorable or maybe more favorable Republican than before, and that would really precipitate her running for re-election, and she'd be a strong favorite unless it was a horrendous year for Republicans to be re-elected. So that is the likelihood. I mean, she has an option. Every Minnesota Republican right today would tell you they would love to have her run against Senator Klobuchar for her reelection bid. I don't think that's going to happen. And I really don't think that as much fun as it would be to have her run against Al Franken in 2 years, I really doubt that's too likely either. So I think we're probably going to see Michelle in the House here for the foreseeable future and put her nose to the grindstone and try to hopefully rise up in the ranks within the congressional Republicans.
Roger Simon, in New Hampshire, you were there today when the big endorsement came. They leaked it last night, not just leaked it, but during Rick Santorum's speech, the Romney campaign put out that John McCain was going to endorse Romney. They're doing everything they could to undermine the speech as it was happening. You described the endorsement event today in New Hampshire as the campaign event from hell. How did it go so badly?
Everything went wrong. John, first of all, it was a joint town hall, something I don't think I've ever seen, where Mitt Romney, where the crowd presumably turned out to see, shared his time and his stage with John McCain. John McCain, frankly, does not like speaking in public, is not terribly good at speaking in public, and he proved it today. The second thing was virtually every question asked was a hostile question, almost all of which came from the front rows of the hall, which Romney continued to call on. They had obviously been packed early with either his Democratic opponents or his Republican opponents, but they were his opponents. And it didn't create a good atmosphere.
Mark McKinnon, what do you make of the McCain endorsement? When I heard about it last night, I thought, okay, is that good for Romney, or is that the worst thing that could happen to Romney at this point?
I'm not sure. It just reinforces that he's a moderate candidate and doesn't help burnish the conservative credentials. I think he's trying to stamp a little heavier. I was a little surprised myself because I know that John Huntsman worked very hard for John McCain in the past, so I was a bit surprised by the endorsement. On the other hand, I don't think it means a hill of beans to anybody in New Hampshire because they are such an independent group. They love to turn conventional wisdom on its ear. They rarely listen to endorsements, and so I think in the long run it doesn't make much of a difference. Except, I mean, to Roger's point, maybe it's a negative.
Howard,
Lawrence,
go ahead.
If I can just say, last night as I was driving home from Iowa, I heard on the radio that John McCain was going to be endorsing Mitt Romney, and I thought that is the best thing that could happen in the long run for Rick Santorum, because it really does define this race as a moderate versus conservative, and that's what we want as conservatives. Want to get it down to a two-person race with that distinction, because 75 to 80% of the Republican base that will be voting in the primaries are conservatives who want a true blue conservative candidate. So yes, this will help Mitt Romney in New Hampshire blunt any charge by Santorum, but in the long run, it's going to really make it him who's already fighting to establish his conservative credentials. It's going to really be an uphill battle for him with John McCain's help. Help that really could end up being a real albatross around his neck.
Howard Dean, tell us what an underfunded insurgent candidacy like Rick Santorum needs coming out of what is essentially a win for him in Iowa.
Well, this is a big problem, and this is why I still think that Mitt Romney is likely to be the nominee. Santorum basically has no organization and no money, and he's going to get a lot of money in the next few weeks, presumably, and I think he could very well beat Mitt Romney in South Carolina. But trying to organize the whole country when you're having one primary a week, and then soon we're going to have 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 primaries in a single week with really big states where you got to be on television. I don't know how Rick Santorum gets through Florida. I really don't. I mean, it's going to have to be some sort of extraordinary amount of money. They're going to spend millions and millions of dollars. And Romney's going to do to Santorum what he did to Gingrich in Iowa with his super PAC that he's got. That he's just going to take Santorum apart. And Santorum's not going to be able to respond because he doesn't have any money.
And meanwhile, we're going to be listening to this war within the Republican Party. Let's listen to Rush Limbaugh today defending Santorum against this new attack that Santorum is some kind of big government Republican. Let's listen to Limbaugh.
Big government to the left means income redistribution, universal health care, union government workers, cradle-to-grave socialism. Those are things that Santorum vehemently opposes. Santorum by no means supports big government in that regard. The big government Santorum supports is a government that protects people by enforcing the law. Be it the right to life, be it the border and immigration, or anything else.
Mark McKinnon, can your pals in the Romney campaign find a way to make that big government Republican thing stick on Santorum, especially when he's got defenders like Rush Limbaugh working for him?
I think it's going to be hard. I mean, Santorum is a clear conservative who's, got a very long record and a consistent record with conservatives. So I think that line of attack is going to be difficult. And I think it's going to be tough for Gingrich to go after him. I mean, Gingrich reminded us that in addition to being an intellectual and a historian, that he's also a blowhard and a whiner. I mean, the notion that he's complaining about negative ads as a guy who was launching bombs from the backbench for years out of Congress is just ridiculous on its face. So I don't think the attacks from Gingrich are going to be particularly effective against Romney. On the other hand, I don't think that Romney's attacks on Santorum is big government, although it's the last Oppo file that they've got, and they've been through them all, so they're going to drop it, and they'll put a ton of weight behind it. We know that.
Mark McKinnon, quickly, before we go to our break, a word on Rick Perry. Can he really go home after Iowa and say, I need a night to sleep on it and think about this, and then come out, as he did today, and say, okay, I've decided I am going to continue? Isn't that kind of stutter step something that scares everybody who might want to support a campaign?
Yeah, it spooks the hell out of anybody who has any notion of supporting him. I mean, all the body language last night was just he was going to fold it up and go home, and who knows what happens in the course of 24 hours, but he gets home, takes a jog, talks to his wife, and says, well, maybe we should go out to South Carolina and see what happens. It's hard to imagine how he raises an extra dollar or adds a single extra vote. There's just not a note of real confidence in that kind of body language and shifting strategy within 24 hours.